That happened. That happened. I'm not going to give you a long introduction to this piece. I think it'll probably speak for itself. It's a love story, and it's called The Wound. I first saw the skyline of Manhattan from a rental car. My boss and I were driving through New Jersey on a business trip, and we rounded a corner on the turnpike, and suddenly, as we rounded the corner, random objects parted, and you could suddenly see across the Hudson River. From that angle, the glittering skyscrapers seemed to rise right out of the water. They seemed to shoot up, dozens of them, hundreds, I don't know. The sight of it was overwhelming. It was like my heart being pulled out of my chest. It was like falling in love. It was like, boom, I want that. I need that. A day or two later, I sat in the Rainbow Room at the top of Rockefeller Center at a window seat looking at the same view from 50 stories over the city down toward the southern tip of the island. I ordered a martini. And as I sipped it, I reflected that I must, after all, be a grown-up. Because only a grown-up could be having this experience. Later, a few years after that first trip, I got myself a job there, downtown, a few blocks from the World Trade Center, and I felt for the first time in my entire life that I had something maybe between my teeth that I could never chew down completely. You know, something that would never go stale, never disappoint me, something to try to master and dominate. A feeling almost of personal power and a kind of triumph. Watch me savor a cigar on the sidewalk and then run to catch the subway right at the last minute, jump on board, make it to Carnegie Hall just in time for the lights to go down. Boom, top of the world, Ma. So what was it I really wanted? I still don't know. I'm an aggressive, competitive person, and maybe it looked like the world's biggest jungle gym. A place to prove myself. Place to prove something to myself. And then came September 11th, 2001. I saw the skyline from the water again that day. Around noon I was on a little sightseeing boat with 30 other people. See, once the black fog shrouding downtown had lifted enough to permit us to leave our building after the worst morning any of us had ever lived through, a group of us ran a few blocks to the water's edge. I was looking for the first thing that floated, and whatever it was, I was going to jump on it. And that turned out to be this little pleasure craft. When it was full, we pulled away, and we rounded a corner of the river, headed up and across the water to Jersey, we hoped. As we rounded the corner of the island, the buildings rose up, glittering in the sun, as always, but you didn't really see them. Your eyes were only for the enormous plume of gray smoke and ash spewing from a hole where the World Trade Center had been a few hours earlier. And at the bottom, this plume looked exactly like the dark, churning, hellish monstrosity it was, but at the top, toward the top, almost as high as the towers had been, it had the audacity to begin softening, lightening, drifting slowly sideways as it hit a current of air. This hole, with the smoke billowing out from it, was like a profusely bleeding gunshot wound on the body of someone you love. There's no sound, there's no other distraction. There's only the awareness of a spreading stain that is slowly and remorselessly blotting out everything you care about most, and you can't make it stop. When they reopened my office in Lower Manhattan on Tuesday, September 18th, I rode back into the city on my usual morning bus, all through the Lincoln Tunnel. A mile and a half under the Hudson, I gripped the armrest with white knuckles, certain that a bomb was going to go off. Nothing happened. Just like nothing had happened during the previous week when I would awaken in the middle of the night, sweating, weeping, and terrified, and I'd check each window and door of our 3-story townhouse in the Jersey suburbs, making sure they were bolted. No terrorists out there. Back to bed, but not to sleep. So after an eternity, I made it through the tunnel. Out of the bus station, up the escalator to the corner of 40th and 8th. And at the entrance to Port Authority, on every wall, column, pillar, were little 8.5 by 11 posters, this size, right? Each one handmade, each one saying much the same thing. Have you seen this person? Name, family's contact information, and a big picture of someone. Happy pictures of people on vacation at a birthday party, smiling, and suddenly seeing those hundreds of smiling faces and their little messages of love and grief like candles held out to me in outstretched palms. The pain of that almost buckled my knees. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, and rather than turn away, I just stood there, letting them look at me and not turning away, just feeling it. The subway ride downtown. Now, the World Trade Center had been a major transportation hub. With it gone, there were fewer trains. What trains there were in service were all half empty this morning. Now, normally on the train, people bury themselves in their newspaper, their iPods, they sit with their eyes shut. You learn not to make eye contact in a big city because it's safer that way. But this morning, and for several days after, people looked right at you. Not just at you, they looked into you. The way a lover looks into you sometimes, with a probing, delicate curiosity, defenselessness. A look you might flinch from, especially from a stranger. But our egos had crumbled to rubble, and now we knew that looking away wasn't going to make us any safer. Far, far from it. We had nothing left to hide from each other. Our faces all spoke the same holy, unspeakable thing. Out of the subway and up the stairs to downtown, where everything was silent and white as after a snowfall. Every surface still covered with the ashes of the World Trade Center. No color anywhere, it seemed, except on the green camouflage of the soldiers who stood on every corner of the twisted little streets of Lower Manhattan. These soldiers were all young men, huge G.I. Joe types with enormous shoulders, V-shaped torsos, biceps like hams. God knows where they'd been shipped in from, because nothing like that grows in New York. Their faces, at least, were not open. Each stood stock still and expressionless at a wooden barricade with a huge semi-automatic weapon strapped across his shoulders, on guard, just like I had been at my house, against a threat that was not coming anymore because the worst thing that could possibly happen already had. The other thing about downtown was the smell. A week earlier, it hadn't been so bad. Running to the water, I had given the rag that was covering my face to someone else, so I breathed in the smoke and the ash. But I didn't recall anything like this. A burning smell, but not a sweet burning smell. A big, white noise, charnel house smell that entered not your nostrils, but your pores. In it, you could detect traces of wood, metal, plastic, rubber, and maybe something else. It's the worst odor you can imagine, and if there is a hell, that's what it smells like. An elegantly dressed woman next to me on the street cried out something wordlessly about it, a sound I've never heard before or since, an animal moan of revulsion and sadness and protest. Later, people put flowers and other memorials on the sidewalks, but for now, there were just a few signs and windows, little makeshift printouts of flags, maybe pictures of the towers with the date, as if to say we were here, the way miners trapped in a shaft might scrawl it on the wall. The merchandising hadn't begun, nor the bickering over what to build at Ground Zero, nor the lies about how the air was perfectly safe to breathe. Only the first of so many lies. In the blasted silence of downtown, with the smoke still belching from its enormous wound, there was only a terrible, stricken kind of humility and awe that had its own special what? Beauty, I guess. The beauty of finally seeing and knowing the worst. Last summer I was in New York again. I had a date that night with a couple of old friends, and we were going to have dinner and see a show. First I thought I'd take a walk around the reservoir in Central Park on this beautiful midsummer day out among the crowd. Joggers went past, old couples clutching each other, teenagers on skateboards, parents with strollers. Wide-eyed tourists pointed their cameras up at the buildings that ring the park. Ice cream carts jingled their bells. Taxis honked, jackhammers throbbed in the distance. But all that fell away. It fell away as I felt something so tremendous rising up from the earth beneath me. A feeling of utter peace, a feeling of belonging. I felt I was all right, that I would always be all right. Not in spite of what happened, but because of what happened. See, here's the truth. Here's the thing I want to say. I would not trade it for anything. I'm glad that I was that close to Ground Zero on 9/11, and if anything, I wish I had been closer. Because we were together, hurt together. It bound us to each other. After 9/11, New York wasn't a jungle gym to me anymore, not a place to prove myself. And maybe that's when you become a grown-up for real. When those you love are no longer a reflection of your own ego, when the people and places around you are no longer things that you take your own reflected identity from, but instead become parts of you that you love deeply, in all their complexity, with all their flaws and their scars and their wounds.